I'm rushing this new video out the door because I have made a spectacular breakthrough on the Phaistos disk. Now, in earlier videos, I proved that it was authentic, and therefore I proved that the Minoans were using movable type almost 3,000 years before the Chinese. I also showed that they were probably speaking Italic. That's a parent language of Latin. Actually, when you throw it in with everything else I've done, I think I've proven that. The DNA, the archaeology, even the Jungian psychology. But as of right now, with this video, using my research on the Minoan language all by itself, I will prove that beyond dispute. Everything that follows will be based precisely on that assumption. Get ready for another shocker, lads, because I know who side A of the Phaistos disk is dedicated to. Two goddesses having something to do with the sun god. Exactly what I've been saying all along. Now, I have a bigger video ready to go, but unfortunately I upgraded my Macintosh to macOS Mojave, and Mojave broke Keynote. That's a presentation software I use for my voiceover sections. Everything in the video is ready for final editing, but for some reason Keynote will not export my animation. That's fine. It'll work good enough for this video, and everything you need will be right here. In fact, that makes everything better, because I need to be more aggressive at approaching linguists to start looking at this work, and this has forced me to keep everything short and sweet. Hey, I know you don't know me from Adam, but would it kill you to give me 10 minutes of your time? Now, everything you need for the case is in this video, but when the bigger one gets uploaded, be sure to watch it. I think it's spectacular. There are a lot of men before me who think they've broken the Phaistos disk, most of whom are better educated and smarter than I am. So why should you believe I figured it out and not them? Because what follows will build naturally on my previous work on the Phaistos disk. There are no major leaps, no scrambling to explain new data. For 4 years, I've actually been working very hard to prove the Minoans were not the ancestors of the Romans. And every time new information comes in, it just ends up plugging up more holes I didn't even know were there. I have a solid external witness. In fact, we've been looking right at this witness for decades. It's gorgeous and spectacular. You can find plenty of high-resolution photos of it on Google, although you should probably use DuckDuckGo. They don't spy on you. As I said, I'm literally going to show you that I'm right. There will be no doubt. There are too many supporting details. If I'm wrong, then we're looking at a hell of a lot of coincidences. And on the flip side, it's embedded in a much bigger case involving archaeology, DNA findings, and even Jungian analysis. And as I've discussed previously, I can, as of this moment, throw all of that out, and I've still got enough to prove my case. My case doesn't demand too many assumptions about the font. The Mycenaean Greeks used this Minoan writing system to write Greek, and Michael Ventris figured out how to read this Greek in the 1950s. There's no reason to assume the sound values are much different for the Minoans than they were for the Greeks. Typically, when I look at other translation attempts, I wonder if we're even living on the same planet. I have made some leaps, but they're not unreasonable. And finally, my first translation attempt made a prediction. Like I said, I found those two goddesses, and they had something to do with the sun god. Obviously, the first thing we need to agree on is, what are these symbols supposed to sound like? Gareth Allen Owens of the Technological Institute of Crete and John Coleman of Oxford University nail the details nicely. I won't say they can't be wrong, but I wouldn't bet on it. Here's their table of sound values. It's kind of hard to find. Just go to DuckDuckGo and type in the opening lines, a table of similarities between signs of the Phaistos disk. Be patient, it takes time to download. Okay. Let's start with some of my older stuff. It'll be important. In Triada, which is about 2 miles from Phaistos, we see something mentioned about a Saria. On the left, whatever it is given an offering of barley. I think Saria is the sun god. He's called Surya in the Rig Veda, and the cognate of that is the Latin soul. The R and the L are called liquids, those sounds. They can be, and often are, swapped, and we know that this can just as likely have been pronounced Salya by the Minoans. This is what I use to prove the Phaistos disk is authentic. The word Zoalnitino written twice. This is Hittic, and that language was unknown until decades after the Phaistos disk was discovered. An obvious cognate of the word shows up in this Hittite ritual. Even better, it's about the sun god. It's some kind of holy place, and it fits so nice it's repeated twice. Now pay attention to this. There's an old woman involved. This won't be the last example of that. This is the paper that launched my last video. Low relief potter's marks in the Phaistos disk. A note on the comb sign, number 21. That comb sign is what's going to make me famous, and hopefully rich and glamorous while we're at it. It shows up exactly 2 times on the disk, on the exact same word, a very special word. I can't wait to show it to you. Among other things, the paper is about bowl F4718, which has this mark on the bottom, the exact one we see on the Phaistos disc, and aside from a couple of other seal impressions from the same era, nowhere else. So they both point to each other, and what do you know? This is a very special bowl with some kind of strange internal piping, the likes of which you see nowhere else, except among the Hittites, specifically here. Which means, of course, these two items not only point to each other, they both point to the Hittites. And the Hittites point right back. Here, next door to where we found that odd pottery, we also found a vase with a bull leaping scene. Very Minoan. And now let's go to the disc, side A. The first four words. Here's where my prediction was made. Ique paieriu etuque auditi aup. Now this ique became the Roman que, which means both and, which tells us we're looking at two people, places, or things. And this migration makes perfect linguistic sense. The construction was originally something like equally A, B, and. Then the Romans later simplified it to and A and B. Now notice that second word, et tu. That's Latin, et tu Brute, you too Brutus. Both paiere you and you, auditi au alp. That dt shows up all over the disc in different forms. That has got to be deity. More, almost pure Latin. And I know who Auditi is. She's also in the Rig Veda. We have Surya, the sun god, and we've got Aditi, his mother. So I predicted long ago that we were looking at two deities having something to do with the sun god, at least one of whom was a goddess. And based on the iconography of ancient Crete, I had predicted Paieriu was basically Mother Earth. They called her Yasasa Ra on the Minoan libation formula. The Greeks called her Patnia, the lady. You will see very soon that I was 100% right. Now to us it seems odd that we'd bring in the sun god's mother. But remember the old woman in the Hittite ritual? Well, here's a Hittite spell with the storm god, although the sun god is actually mentioned. They bring in his mother too. Apparently there was something going on with old women for these people. Okay, all the linguistic work so far is my old stuff. Now it's time for the breakthrough. Word A17. Up until now, I'd given it a straightforward transliteration. Ique wawa te rai sui. Again, reading from right to left. But I noticed that sui is a double-faced symbol. The most important symbol for the Minoans was the double-faced axe. And I realized this is a double-faced word. The wa in the center is the spine. So we break it up. Ique wa, waterai, sui. I instantly recognize that center word. Water. That's the Hittite word for water. And that's allowed here because we know we're looking at some kind of weird Hittite Minoan mashup. Ique wa, water, sui. So I'll make a leap. Ique wa is the Minoan word for water, perfectly matched. The Latin word for water is aqua. But you just can't take a Latin dictionary and try to read a Minoan document, even if Minoan is the ancestral language to Latin. The Phaistos disc was created 1,000 years before Rome was even founded, officially. And by the time of the Caesars, and the Latin we learn is the Latin of the Caesars, the language had evolved so much that Romans themselves couldn't even read documents or monuments that had been created during the first years of the Republic. Just as an FYI, Classic Latin is actually dumbed down Latin. The stress rules were dramatically simplified, and there was a period where Latin was shedding a lot of vowels. And then they would have longer vowels and shorter vowels. All that went away. On the other hand, you can use Latin as an anchor point, provided you have another anchor point. And using the magic of the internet, I have one. Proto-Indo-European, a lot of which has been reconstructed. Just as Latin descended from Minoan, Minoan descended from Proto-Indo-European. And the Proto-Indo-European word for water is something like ekwe. I know it sounds weird, but it explains why the Minoan word for water had 3 syllables. Also notice, the que kernel of the original Proto-Indo-European word was retained. I've recovered a perfect transitional linguistic species. Again, as an FYI, Proto-Indo-European had glottals, at least 1 and maybe up to 3. So, ekwe has been reconstructed with the second glottal. Hittite retained glottals. With a glottal, you play around with your glottis, that weird thing at the very top of your throat and the very back of your mouth. It's even got a weird name. It's kind of gross and weird to work with. As you can see, I did a bad job of it. We stopped messing around there millennia ago, thank God. Now that last part, sui, has 2 different Latin possibilities. The possessive his water, but I don't think it is. Water, stitched together. That sounds weird, unless you understand the Bronze Age Mediterranean cosmos. The cosmos is a bubble. It is surrounded by unlimited waters and split out from those waters by a firmament. This is the story in Genesis. The Iquiwawatasui is where the waters above are stitched together with the waters below. Now, if you're a Minoan or a Hittite, you live in the center of the universe. Where does the other guy live? At the Iquiwawatasui. Now, as you might guess, I'll be talking a lot more about the Hittites in the main video. There were many changes afoot with them in the age of the Phaistos disk that would have definitely got the attention of the Minoans. The metaphor of stitching and sewing and clothing in a manner is deeply embedded here. I guess you can call this a word, but it almost rises to the level of symbol in its own right. Hides are stitched together. The rise symbol is a papyrus reed. You make papyrus by breaking these off into strips and weaving them together. And this biface comb is used to weave textiles. But remember, the sun rises and sets out of the great deep. And there is the Iquiwawatasui, splitting the land of the living from the land of the dead. For the Minoans, the sun rose and set and shined over both. And the Iquiwawatasui sounds a lot like Iquatasui. We get the word equator from equator. A baker bakes, buyers buy and sellers sell. An equator splits equally in half. There's that equi again. This is an old italic sound law, ancient of days. It would have struck the Minoan ear exactly as it would have their Roman descendants living under the Caesars 17 centuries later. Hides facing up and hides facing down? Yep, the word is repeated at A29. And there the hides are indeed flipped, and they are under what looks like a shield, but it is in fact a kernos, a pottery piece with compartments used to hold multiple offerings. Among the later Greeks, kernoi were used in mystery cults of the mother goddesses like Persephone and Demeter. There's no doubt they got these from the Minoans. We know the Minoans had them. So these hides are underneath the earth, and they're also underneath our feet. Hence the head is turned face down. This is exactly what you saw on the map. Scholars have all thought this was a scribal era. Not at all. This is the work of a master. Obviously, as a model of the cosmos, this is crap. But as a mandala, this is sublime. It is full of energy. It is dynamic. You hear a lot about projection. You just project in your hate. But projection is only evil if you wallow in it. This is projection at its most beautiful. And when used beautifully, projection lets you see the back of your own head, psychologically speaking. And this is probably another reason why they were so fascinated with the Hittites. Not only were there interesting political changes afoot, but they would have received unconscious projection from the Minoans just by virtue of where they lived. You follow the sun out of the great waters, the depth, the unconscious, then back into the unconscious. Out of the unconscious, into the unconscious. Remember, the Phaistos disk is a spiral. There were spirals and swastikas all over Minoan Crete. Into the unconscious you must go, and back out again. This is what a human does. He dances. And this is what they do to this very day in our homeland of south-central Turkey. This is the womb of our great race, the Konya Plain, where we lived way back in the Neolithic. It is a dialectical dance, and it can be dangerous, but you have no choice if you want to be human. People who do not do this dance are either driven by their unconscious like cattle, or even worse, their conscious ego completely collapses, in which case you're a schizophrenic. Or they suppress their unconscious and become neurotic, and neurotic people can be really boring. But it's not just day, then suddenly, night. There's a dusk and dawn too. So when someone brings me their dream, I know there's a conscious ego, the sun, broad daylight. I know there's a personal unconscious, dusk, dawn. And I know there's a collective unconscious. We all agree we inherit a basic body plan, so why not a basic psyche plan? So on the important question of individualism or collectivism, the answer is yes. So when working with a dream, there's the process of reporting and associating and amplifying. Say you had a dream about a spider. I might ask, what happened today? Did you happen to see a spider? Even trivial details are important. If your unconscious latched onto an image from that day, your unconscious doesn't think it's trivial at all. And then I would ask, what do you think of when you think about a spider? How did it make you feel? Your emotional reaction is important. Surely you'd be horrified, but what if in the dream the spider made you laugh? As for the collective, I would consult a dream or symbol dictionary to see what it had to say about spiders. Now understand, none of this will get you into heaven. That only comes from the sacrifice of the Lord Jesus Christ. The Minoans confuse their psychology for their cosmology. That is confusing psychology for theology. C.G. Jung made it very clear over and over again that that is a bad mistake. So, how do my crazy theories hold up when held up to Minoan iconography? They hold up quite well, thank you very much. Here's the Labrys. It represents the sun, just as it breaks from the depths. It rides through the firmament, separating the waters above from the waters below. FYI, if you want to study Minoan iconography, stick to Nano Marnatos. She's the master. We disagree over the sun god. She seems to think he's actually a goddess, but I won't argue here. Obviously, if forced to make a choice on the fly, knowing what you know now, you throw in with Marinatos. She's a world-renowned Minoan scholar, as was her father. On the left, the sun is below, and on the right, it is above and below. And here's the sun itself, below. Oh, but I haven't revealed my showstopper yet. Here it is, the Triada sarcophagus. It's from Triada, which is only 2.5 miles from Phaistos, about 4 kilometers, 350 years after the disc. So we're looking at an enduring mythology that was truly worthy of something as grand as the Phaistos disc. This sarcophagus is an echo of the old Minoan civilization. It might have been a part of a Minoan revival. Its kings had been driven out of power 100 years before this sarcophagus was made, and thousands of rank-and-file Minoans voted with their feet and went into exile. The population of major cities like Knossos and Phaistos cratered after the kings were overthrown. By this time, the vast majority of Cretans had abandoned the old language. They were speaking Greek. But as enduring as this mythology was with the Minoans, it was idiosyncratic and specific to them, and it disappeared with them. The bad news is it baffled me in my early attempts to break the disc. The amazing news is, because this myth is so idiosyncratic and specific, there's no way in hell I got this wrong. Have you noticed they're wearing hides? Can you see the rosettes tucked into spirals, the flowers? This is a well-established symbol of the sun all over the Eastern Mediterranean at this time. Look at side A of the disc, dead center, a rosette. Boom. These are the short sides. Well, I'll be damned. 2 goddesses in a sun chariot. We know it's a sun chariot because we see rosettes all over the place. Exactly as I predicted. But it's only when I broke down the Equiwa water suite that I realized we were dealing with a Minoan cosmology and Minoan ideas about the underworld. So I never thought to look at something like a sarcophagus. What you see in writing on the Phaistos disc, side A, you see in living color right here on this sarcophagus. Here's the sun in the day sky pulled by a griffin, a divine creature with the body of a lion and the wings of an eagle, sometimes a head too, although sometimes a human. And for that image, we have a perfectly well-behaved Equiwa water suite. But on the other end, notice she's underground and underwater. Notice here the chariot is pulled by goats. I would guess the hides they wore were goat hides. Perhaps you sacrificed goats at funerals to make sure the deceased had a secure ride to a happy place in the underworld, because there were plenty of places that were not happy. And although you can't really tell from here, this chariot is also under our feet. Exactly what you see in our wonky little word, A29. That is right towards the center. See the rosette? So, do you not agree? Have I not literally shown you that I was right? Abracadabra.